The emergency signal cut through the peaceful silence of the Galactic Council chamber like a knife. Ambassador Theron's hands shook as he activated the holographic display, showing the desperate faces of his people trapped on Meridian 4. The images were terrible. Buildings burned in the background, while Velan civilians huddled together in fear. "Please," Theron's voice cracked with emotion. "The Krell raiders have surrounded our colony. We have maybe 2 days before they break through our last defenses. We need help now." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Counselor Ixon, a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms, spoke first. "Ambassador Theron, we sympathize with your situation. However, military intervention requires careful planning and diplomatic consideration. Perhaps we should send negotiators first." Theron's eyes widened in disbelief. "Negotiators? The Krell don't negotiate. They conquer and enslave. My people are dying right now while we sit here talking." Another council member suggested sending medical supplies and defensive equipment. Another proposed economic sanctions against the Krell Empire. Each suggestion was more useless than the last. Theron felt his hope draining away with each passing moment. "What about the humans?" a small voice said from the back of the chamber. The room fell silent. Several council members exchanged nervous glances. The mention of humans always created tension in the council. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 5 years ago, and their presence still made many species uncomfortable. Counselor Ixon frowned. "The humans? Are you certain that's wise? They are Deathworlders." The term hung in the air like a curse. Deathworlders. Species that evolved on planets so hostile that survival itself was a daily battle. Earth was classified as a Class 12 Death World, one of the most dangerous planets known to support intelligent life. Gravity twice the galactic average. Weather patterns that could kill in minutes. Predators at every level of the food chain. And somehow, humans had not just survived but thrived. "Perhaps that's exactly what we need," Theron said quietly. His people were peaceful farmers and artists. They had no military to speak of. But he had heard stories about humans. Disturbing stories. Stories that made him uncomfortable. But right now, uncomfortable was better than extinct. The council debated for another hour before finally reaching a decision. They would contact Earth and request assistance. Most council members assumed humans would send humanitarian aid or perhaps a small defense force. The humans were known for their strange sense of honor that compelled them to help others, even at cost to themselves. The message was sent through faster-than-light communication channels. The response came back in less than an hour, which surprised everyone. Human bureaucracy was supposedly terrible, yet they had responded almost instantly. Lieutenant Amy Richardson sat at the communication station of the Crimson Hawk when the message arrived. She read it twice before standing up and walking to the captain's ready room. She pressed the door chime and waited. "Come in," Captain Jake Morrison's voice called out. Amy entered to find Morrison reviewing tactical reports at his desk. He was a man in his early 40s with gray starting to show at his temples. His face carried the kind of calm that came from seeing too much combat. When he looked up at her, his brown eyes were sharp and alert. "We got a job, Captain," Amy said, handing him the datapad. Morrison read the message in silence. His expression didn't change, but Amy had served with him long enough to notice the slight tightening around his eyes. That meant he was already running through combat scenarios in his head. "Krell raiders," he said finally. 15 ships. Ground forces estimated at 5,000. Hostages numbering around 10,000 Velan civilians. "The Council is requesting humanitarian assistance," Amy added. Morrison almost smiled. "Almost. I'm sure they are. Prep the crew for combat operations. Get me everything we have on Krell tactics and Velan colony layouts. Contact Sergeant Brooks and tell him to ready his Marines for possible ground insertion." "Captain, the Council message specifically mentioned sending supplies and defensive equipment. They didn't ask for military intervention." Morrison stood up and walked to the window overlooking the hangar bay where crew members prepared the Crimson Hawk for departure. The ship was beautiful in a dangerous way. Dark armor plating covered every surface. Weapons systems lined the hull. It looked exactly like what it was, a predator. They sent an SOS to Deathworlders, Lieutenant, Morrison said quietly. They don't get to choose what kind of help they receive. If they wanted diplomats and cargo ships, they should have called someone else. Amy nodded. She had expected this response. The crew will be ready in 3 hours. Make it 2, Morrison replied. Those people don't have time for us to be comfortable. Within 2 hours, the Crimson Hawk undocked from the orbital station above Earth. The crew of 150 moved through their duties with practiced efficiency. There were no grand speeches or dramatic declarations. This was just another job. Another call for help that needed answering. As the ship entered faster-than-light travel, Morrison stood on the bridge watching the stars stretch into lines. Beside him, Commander Lisa Garrett reviewed the tactical situation. 15-1 odds, she observed. They're not going to expect us to engage. Good, Morrison replied. Let's keep it that way. The Crimson Hawk disappeared into the void, carrying with it the kind of help that the Galactic Council both desperately needed and secretly feared. The Deathworlders were coming. The Crimson Hawk dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Meridian system with barely a ripple in space. On the bridge, Captain Jake Morrison studied the tactical display with cold focus. 15 Krell warships formed a blockade around the planet. Each ship was twice the size of the Crimson Hawk. Scan complete, Captain, Lieutenant Amy Richardson reported from her station. Krell flagship is in high orbit. Smaller vessels scattered around the planet. Ground forces have occupied the northern continent where the main Velan colony is located. Morrison nodded slowly. Life signs. Detecting approximately 8,000 Velan civilians still alive. They're concentrated in underground shelters beneath the capital city. Krell ground forces are working to breach the shelter doors. Chief Engineer Claire Madison looked up from her console. Captain, I'm picking up communications from the planet. The Velan survivors are watching our arrival. They seem confused that only one ship showed up. I bet they are, Commander Lisa Garrett muttered from the tactical station. The Council probably promised them a relief fleet. Morrison allowed himself a thin smile. We are a relief fleet. Lieutenant Richardson, any response from the Krell? Yes, sir. The flagship is hailing us. They sound amused. Put them through. Audio only. The bridge speakers crackled to life. A harsh, grating voice filled the space. Human vessel, this is Commander Varkesh of the Krell Empire. You have entered a restricted military zone. 1 ship against 15. Your council has sent you to die. Turn back now and we will let you leave. Morrison picked up the communication handset. When he spoke, his voice was calm and conversational, as if discussing the weather. Commander Varkesh, this is Captain Jake Morrison. We've received a distress call from the Velan colony. We're here to provide assistance. A sound like grinding metal came through the speakers. Krell laughter. Assistance? You're outnumbered and outgunned. What kind of assistance can one ship provide? The permanent kind, Morrison replied and disconnected the channel. He turned to his crew. All hands, battle stations. Atlas, activate combat protocols. The ship's artificial intelligence, Atlas, responded immediately. Combat protocols active. All weapon systems online. Adaptive armor configured for maximum protection. Course calculated for optimal attack vectors. The Crimson Hawk's hull began to shift and change. Plates of armor moved and reconfigured, creating angles designed to deflect incoming fire. Weapon ports opened along the sides. The ship transformed from a vessel into a weapon. Pilot Officer Kevin Hughes sat at the helm, his hands steady on the controls. Captain, I have a course that will take us through their formation. It's going to be rough. Rough is what we do best, Morrison said. Execute when ready. The Crimson Hawk accelerated forward with sudden violence. Hughes pushed the engines far beyond what Galactic Council ships could handle. Human engineering had a different philosophy than the rest of the galaxy. Where other species built for comfort and efficiency, humans built for survival. On the Krell flagship, Commander Varkesh watched in disbelief as the human ship charged directly at his blockade. All ships, open fire. Destroy that vessel. Energy beams and missiles erupted from every Krell ship. The space between them and the Crimson Hawk filled with deadly fire. It should have been impossible for anything to survive that much firepower. But the Crimson Hawk didn't just survive. It danced. Hughes threw the ship into a spinning dive that defied physics. The adaptive armor redirected energy blasts away from vital systems. Missiles exploded against shields that should have collapsed but somehow held. The ship twisted and turned through the incoming fire like a fighter craft instead of a warship. Entering weapons range, Lieutenant Greg Palmer called from his station. Railguns locked on target. "Fire!" Morrison ordered. The Crimson Hawk shuddered as its railguns launched projectiles at speeds approaching light. The metal slugs crossed the distance in seconds. When they hit the first Krell ship, the results were devastating. The slug punched through the shields as if they weren't there, tore through the hull, and exited the other side. The Krell ship exploded in a ball of fire. "Target destroyed," Palmer confirmed. "Acquiring next target." The Krell fleet tried to surround the Crimson Hawk, but Hughes was already moving. He used the planet's gravity to slingshot the ship around, building speed while changing direction. The Krell ships were faster in a straight line, but human vessels were built for dogfighting. Another Krell ship exploded. Then another. Morrison called out targets in a steady voice while his crew executed his orders with mechanical precision. There was no panic on the bridge. No fear. Just professionals doing a job they had trained for their entire lives. "Captain, the Krell are attempting to retreat," Amy reported. "Negative," Morrison replied. "They came here to hurt innocent people. They don't get to leave until we're done talking." The Crimson Hawk positioned itself between the Krell fleet and open space. Any ship trying to escape would have to go through it first. None of them wanted to try. Commander Varkesh's voice came over the communication channel again. This time, there was no amusement. "Human ship, we can end this. We have hostages on the planet. Stand down or we will execute them all." Morrison's expression didn't change. He had expected this. Hostage-taking was a standard Krell tactic. "Lieutenant Richardson, open a channel to all Krell ground forces." "Channel open, sir." Morrison's voice went out across every Krell communication frequency on the planet. "Krell ground forces, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Crimson Hawk. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from all Velan population centers and surrender your weapons. After 30 seconds, we stop being polite." The Krell ground commander responded with threats and curses. Morrison listened patiently until the 30 seconds expired. Then he nodded to Sergeant Danny Brooks, who stood ready in the drop bay with his Marines. "You're cleared for deployment, Sergeant," Morrison said. Brooks grinned inside his helmet. "Finally. Let's go show them how Deathworlders fight." The drop pods launched from the Crimson Hawk like bullets fired from a gun. They streaked through the atmosphere, trailing fire and carrying the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy directly into the heart of enemy territory. The Velan civilians huddled in their shelters watched their scanners with growing hope and terror. The humans were coming. They just weren't sure if that was a good thing or not. The drop pods hit the ground like meteors, creating craters in the Krell encampment. Before the dust settled, the hatches blew open and Sergeant Danny Brooks emerged with his Marines. Their powered armor made them look like walking fortresses, each soldier standing over 7 feet tall in their gear. Private Troy Bennett scanned the area through his helmet display. "Sergeant, I count 200 Krell soldiers in the immediate area. More coming from the east." "Good," Brooks replied. "Saves us the trouble of finding them. Hannah, light them up." Private Hannah Cole stepped forward with her heavy weapon. The minigun spun up with a whine before unleashing a stream of armor-piercing rounds. Krell soldiers scattered for cover, but the human weapons cut through their positions like paper. Trees exploded into splinters. Stone walls crumbled under the onslaught. The Krell returned fire, but their energy weapons splashed harmlessly against the marine armor. Human defensive technology had advanced far beyond what the Galactic Council used. The armor didn't just absorb the hits. It redistributed the energy and actually strengthened the shields with each impact. "Move forward," Brooks ordered. "Standard assault pattern. Troy, find me the hostages. Nina, I need those fortifications down." The Marines advanced through the Krell positions with terrifying efficiency. They moved like they had done this 1,000 times before. In reality, they had. Earth was a planet where survival meant constant fighting. Every human child grew up learning to deal with predators, natural disasters, and environments that killed without mercy. Military training just refined what evolution had already built. Corporal Nina Walsh sprinted toward a fortified bunker where Krell officers coordinated their forces. She planted explosive charges on the reinforced door, then calmly walked away. The explosion tore the door off its hinges. Before the smoke cleared, she threw in flash grenades and followed them inside. The Krell inside never had a chance. Nina moved through the bunker like death itself, her weapon barking in short, controlled bursts. Every shot hit its target. There was no wasted ammunition, no panic, just cold execution of her mission. Outside, Troy Bennett had located the entrance to the civilian shelters. Krell soldiers had set up heavy weapons to blast through the doors. They never saw him coming. Troy had specialized in reconnaissance and infiltration. While the other Marines drew attention with their direct assault, he slipped through the shadows like a ghost. The Krell had better senses than humans in some ways, but humans had learned to hunt on a planet filled with predators far more dangerous than any Krell. He took down 3 guards silently with his combat knife before they even knew he was there. The 4th guard turned to raise an alarm, but Troy's sidearm coughed twice. The guard dropped without a sound. "Sergeant, I've secured the shelter entrance," Troy reported. "The door is damaged but still holding." Krell were about 10 minutes from breaking through. "Good work," Brooks replied. "Hold that position. We're coming to you." Above the planet, Captain Morrison watched the battle through satellite feeds. His tactical display showed Marine positions as blue dots and Krell forces as red. The blue dots were systematically eliminating the red ones with mathematical precision. "Captain, the Krell flagship is trying to target our Marines from orbit," Lieutenant Palmer warned. Morrison's response was immediate. "Denied. Take out their targeting systems." The Crimson Hawk's railguns spoke again. 3 precisely aimed shots disabled the flagship's ability to fire on the planet. The Krell commander screamed threats over the open channel, but Morrison ignored him. His attention was focused on his people on the ground. Back on the surface, the Marines had fought their way to the shelter entrance. The Velan civilians inside could hear the sounds of battle through the thick doors. Explosions. Weapons fire. Screams from Krell soldiers. Then sudden silence. A voice came through their communication system. It was rough and speaking through a translator, but somehow comforting. "Velan civilians, this is Sergeant Danny Brooks of the Human Marines. The area is secure. We're opening the doors now. Please don't be alarmed by our appearance." The shelter doors groaned open. Sunlight streamed in for the first time in days. The Velan people emerged slowly, their eyes adjusting to the brightness. What they saw made many of them step back in fear. The human Marines stood among the bodies of their enemies. Their armor was scorched and dented from battle, but still functional. They were huge and terrifying. Several Velan children started crying at the sight of them. Brooks removed his helmet, revealing a very ordinary human face. He was a young man, maybe 30 years old, with brown hair and tired eyes. He smiled gently at the frightened civilians. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. We're the good guys, I promise." An elderly Velan woman stepped forward. She looked at Brooks, then at the destruction around them, then back at Brooks. "You saved us. 1 ship and a handful of soldiers against an army." Brooks shrugged. "That's what we do, ma'am. Is anyone hurt? Our medical officer can treat injuries." "How?" the woman asked. "How did you do this? You're just people. You bleed and die like anyone else." "That's true," Brooks admitted. "But we come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We learned to be very good at not dying. And we're really good at making sure the bad guys do the dying instead." Private Hannah Cole approached with a Krell prisoner. The alien was wounded but alive. Brooks looked at the prisoner with something between pity and contempt. "This one surrendered," Hannah reported. "What should we do with him?" "Treat his wounds," Brooks ordered. "Then secure him with the others. We don't execute prisoners, even when they deserve it." The Krell prisoner looked confused. In his culture, defeated enemies were shown no mercy. "You spare me? Why?" Brooks met the alien's eyes. "Because we're not like you. We're dangerous when we need to be, but we're not monsters. There's a difference." Above them, Captain Morrison's voice came through on their communication channel. "Sergeant Brooks, status report. Area secure, Captain. Hostages safe. Enemy forces neutralized or surrendered. We're ready for extraction." "Negative on extraction," Morrison replied. "The Krell flagship is making one last attempt to salvage their operation. I need you to hold that position until I deal with them." "Understood, sir. We'll keep these people safe." Brooks turned to his squad. "You heard the captain. Set up a defensive perimeter. Nothing gets through to these civilians. Nothing." The Marines moved into position, their weapons trained on the surrounding area. The Velan people watched them with a mixture of gratitude and fear. These humans were their saviors, but they were also the most dangerous beings the Velan had ever encountered. In orbit, the Crimson Hawk positioned itself between the planet and the Krell flagship. Commander Varkesh had one last card to play, and Morrison was going to make sure he never got the chance to use it. The battle wasn't over yet. Commander Varkesh stared at his tactical display with growing desperation. His fleet of 15 ships had been reduced to 7. His ground forces had either surrendered or been eliminated. And one human ship had done all of it. "Commander, the human vessel is blocking our escape route," his tactical officer reported. "They're maintaining position between us and open space." Varkesh's claws scraped against the armrest of his command chair. The Krell Empire had conquered dozens of species over the centuries. They were feared across the galaxy. But they had never faced Deathworlders in actual combat before. Now Varkesh understood why the Galactic Council spoke of humans in hushed, nervous tones. "Charge all weapons," he ordered. "Target the human ship. If we can destroy it, we can still escape." The remaining Krell ships moved into formation, concentrating their firepower on the Crimson Hawk. It was a desperate move, but Varkesh had no other options. His superiors would execute him for this failure anyway. At least if he took the human ship down with him, his death would mean something. On the Crimson Hawk's bridge, Captain Morrison watched the Krell ships gather for their final assault. "They're going all in," he observed calmly. "We're outnumbered 7-1, Commander Lisa Garrett pointed out. "Even for us, those are tough odds." Morrison nodded. "Lieutenant Palmer, prepare the Nova strike package. Amy, send a message to all Krell ships." Amy's fingers flew across her console. "Channel open, sir." Morrison spoke clearly and without emotion. "Krell vessels, this is your final warning. Stand down and surrender. You cannot win this fight. Don't throw away lives for nothing." Varkesh's response was a roar of fury. "We are Krell. We do not surrender to inferior species. All ships, fire everything." The space around the Crimson Hawk erupted with weapons fire. Energy beams and missiles converged on the human ship from 7 different directions. The coordinated assault was precisely calculated to overwhelm even the most advanced shields. But humans didn't fight the way other species expected. "Atlas, execute defensive pattern Morrison 7, the captain ordered. The ship's artificial intelligence responded instantly. "Pattern Morrison 7 executing. Warning, this maneuver will exceed recommended stress limits." "Noted," Morrison replied. He had written Pattern Morrison 7 himself after a particularly difficult engagement 3 years ago. It was dangerous and pushed both ship and crew to their absolute limits. It was also incredibly effective. The Crimson Hawk didn't try to dodge the incoming fire. Instead, it accelerated directly into it. The ship's adaptive armor reconfigured on the fly, creating angles that deflected energy weapons away from vital systems. Missiles were intercepted by point defense systems that fired thousands of rounds per second. The ship shuddered and shook from the impacts. Lights flickered on the bridge. Warning alarms sounded from multiple stations. But the Crimson Hawk kept moving forward, threading through the enemy formation like a needle through cloth. "Now," Morrison said quietly. Lieutenant Palmer triggered the Nova strike package. Every weapon on the Crimson Hawk fired simultaneously. Railguns, missiles, energy cannons, and experimental weapons that the Galactic Council didn't even know existed. The amount of firepower released in that single moment was enough to destroy a small moon. 3 Krell ships exploded instantly. 2 more were crippled and began leaking atmosphere. The remaining 2 ships tried to scatter, but the Crimson Hawk was already moving to intercept. Pilot Officer Kevin Hughes sent the ship into a tight turn that should have been impossible for something that size. The inertial dampeners struggled to keep up. Everyone on the bridge felt the G-forces pushing them into their seats. But Hughes held the course, his hands steady on the controls. "We have lock on the flagship," Palmer reported. Morrison considered for a moment. The battle was won. The Krell were defeated. He could destroy Varkesh's ship with a single shot. But that wasn't why humanity had come to the stars. They weren't here to be conquerors or executioners. "Disable their engines and weapons," Morrison ordered. "Leave life support intact." "Sir." Palmer looked surprised. "You heard me, Lieutenant. We're not here to commit genocide. We're here to stop a threat and protect innocent people. There's a difference." The Crimson Hawk's weapons fired with surgical precision. The shots disabled the flagship's ability to fight or flee without destroying the ship entirely. Commander Varkesh found himself sitting in a dead vessel, surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet, utterly defeated. Morrison opened a communication channel. "Commander Varkesh, your fleet is destroyed. Your ground forces have surrendered. You have no weapons and no engines. This fight is over." Varkesh slumped in his command chair. His career was finished. His life was probably forfeit. But he had to know. How? How did one ship defeat 15? "Because we're Deathworlders," Morrison replied. "We come from a planet that tried to kill us in 1,000 different ways. We learned to fight or we died. And more importantly, we learned why we fight. Not for conquest or glory, but to protect those who can't protect themselves." "The Galactic Council will never accept you as equals," Varkesh said bitterly. "They fear you too much." "I know," Morrison said. "But we didn't come here to be liked. We came here because people needed help. Amy, signal the Galactic Council. Tell them Meridian 4 is secure and the Krell threat has been neutralized." On the planet's surface, Sergeant Brooks and his Marines maintained their defensive positions around the Velan civilians. The locals had started bringing out food and water, offering it to the humans. Several Velan children had overcome their initial fear and were now asking questions about the marine armor. "Is it heavy?" one young Velan asked Troy Bennett. Troy smiled. "Very heavy. But we train in high gravity, so we're used to it." "Are you really from a death world?" another child asked. "We are," Troy confirmed. "Our planet can be dangerous. But it also taught us to look out for each other. That's why we're here helping you." Dr. Peter Callahan, the Crimson Hawk's chief medical officer, had transported down to treat the wounded. He worked on Velan and Krell patients with equal care, his hands steady and professional. A Velan doctor watched him work with fascination. "You treat even your enemies?" the Velan doctor asked. "They stopped being enemies the moment they surrendered," Callahan replied without looking up from his patient. "Now they're just people who need medical attention. That's what doctors do." The Velan doctor shook his head in wonder. "Your species is very strange. Very dangerous, but also very kind." "That's humanity for you," Callahan agreed. "We contain multitudes." In orbit, Morrison received confirmation from the Galactic Council. Ships were being dispatched to take custody of the Krell prisoners and provide additional support to the Velan colony. Ambassador Theron had personally requested to speak with Morrison. When the communication channel opened, Theron's face showed overwhelming gratitude mixed with lingering fear. "Captain Morrison, on behalf of my people, I thank you. You saved us when no one else would." "We did what needed doing," Morrison replied simply. "Nothing more, nothing less. But how do we repay you? What do you want in return?" Morrison smiled slightly. "Just remember that when someone sends an SOS, you answer it. That's all we ask. Help others the way we helped you." The conversation ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. "Set course for home. Our work here is done." The Crimson Hawk slowly pulled away from Meridian 4, leaving behind a grateful population and a shattered enemy fleet. The Galactic Council Chamber was more crowded than usual. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to discuss the Meridian 4 incident. The emergency session had been called at the request of multiple member worlds, all of whom had the same question: what exactly were the humans capable of? Counselor Ixon stood at the center of the chamber, his 4 arms gesturing as he spoke. The reports from Meridian 4 are difficult to believe. 1 human ship defeated 15 Krell warships. A handful of human soldiers neutralized 5,000 Krell ground forces. These numbers seem impossible. And yet they are verified, Ambassador Theron said quietly from his seat. I watched it happen. My people are alive because of the humans. The Crimson Hawk did in hours what we thought would require an entire fleet. A representative from the Quallon species stood up. This raises serious concerns about military balance in the galaxy. If humans possess such overwhelming force, what prevents them from using it for conquest? The same thing that brought them to Meridian 4 in the first place, Theron replied. They answered a call for help. They could have ignored us or demanded payment. Instead, they risked their lives to save strangers. The Council debated for hours. Some species argued that human military capability should be restricted. Others suggested that humanity should be given more responsibilities in galactic security. A few even proposed making humans a permanent peacekeeping force. Counselor Ixon finally called for order. We have decided to send an official delegation to meet with the Crimson Hawk crew. We need to understand these Deathworlders better. 2 days later, Counselor Ixon arrived at the human orbital station above Earth. He had never visited the human home world before. The sight of it through the viewport made him uncomfortable. The planet looked beautiful but deadly. He could see massive storm systems swirling across the surface. The gravity readings alone would crush most species. Captain Jake Morrison met him in the station's conference room. The human looked tired but professional. He offered Ixon a seat and a beverage, following proper diplomatic protocol. "Counselor, what can I do for you?" Morrison asked. Ixon studied the human carefully. "I came to understand how you did what you did. The Crimson Hawk is not significantly larger than standard Galactic Council vessels. Your crew numbers only 150. Yet you achieved what should have been impossible." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "It's not about the size of the ship or the number of crew. It's about why we fight and how we train." "Explain," Ixon requested. "Earth is a harsh world," Morrison began. "Our gravity is higher than galactic average. Our weather can kill in minutes. We have predators that evolved specifically to hunt us. We have diseases, natural disasters, and environments that range from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Survival on Earth isn't guaranteed. It's earned every single day." Ixon nodded slowly. "This is why you're classified as Deathworlders." "Right. But here's what most species don't understand. That harsh environment didn't just make us tough. It made us cooperative. Humans survived because we learned to work together. We protect each other. We help those who are weaker. We answer calls for help because we know what it's like to need help." "But your combat capabilities," Ixon pressed. "Your weapons technology far exceeds Council standards." "Why?" Morrison's expression became serious. "Because we know what real danger looks like. We don't build weapons to conquer. We build them to protect. The Crimson Hawk is dangerous because it has to be. The galaxy has threats that need to be stopped, and someone has to be willing to stop them." Lieutenant Amy Richardson entered the room with a data pad. "Captain, we received another distress call. Colony on the edge of Council space is reporting pirate attacks." Morrison took the pad and reviewed it. "How many ships are nearby?" "None within range to respond in time," Amy replied. Ixon watched Morrison's face. He saw the human captain make a decision without hesitation. "Prep the ship. We leave in 1 hour." He turned to Ixon. "I apologize, Counselor, but our conversation will have to continue another time." "You're going to respond to this call?" Ixon asked. "Even though you just returned from Meridian 4? "They need help," Morrison said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Ixon accompanied Morrison to the observation deck as the Crimson Hawk prepared for departure. He watched the crew move through their duties with quiet efficiency. No dramatics. No speeches. Just people doing a job because it needed doing. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Ixon said. "You're dangerous not because you want to be, but because you have to be. And you use that danger to protect others." "That's the idea," Morrison agreed. "We're not perfect. We make mistakes. But we try to do the right thing, even when it's hard." Dr. Callahan walked past, carrying medical supplies. He nodded to Ixon politely before continuing to the medical bay. Sergeant Brooks passed by with his Marines, checking their equipment. None of them looked like monsters. They looked like ordinary people preparing to do an extraordinary job. "The galaxy fears you," Ixon admitted. "I know," Morrison replied. "But fear isn't respect. Someday, maybe they'll understand that humans can be trusted with power because we know what power costs. We've paid that price too many times not to take it seriously." The Crimson Hawk undocked from the station. Ixon watched it accelerate away, heading toward another crisis, another call for help that needed answering. He finally understood what made humans different. They were dangerous. That was undeniable. But they were dangerous in service of something bigger than themselves. They fought not for glory or conquest, but because someone, somewhere, needed their help. And they would always answer that call. Ixon returned to the council chamber and delivered his report. His recommendations were clear. Humanity should not be restricted or feared. They should be respected and trusted. Because the galaxy needed Deathworlders. Not to conquer or terrorize, but to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would be given greater authority in council security matters. They would be called upon when threats emerged. Some species still objected, still feared what humans might become. But Ambassador Theron stood and spoke the words that silenced the objections. "When my people sent an SOS, only the humans answered. They didn't ask for payment. They didn't seek glory. They came because we needed them. That's the kind of species I want protecting the galaxy." Across space, the Crimson Hawk arrived at another colony under attack. Captain Morrison gave his orders calmly. His crew responded with practiced precision. The pirates threatening the colony never stood a chance. When it was over, Morrison stood on the bridge and looked at the stars. Lieutenant Amy Richardson approached him with a cup of coffee. "Another successful mission, Captain," she said. "It's just what we do," Morrison replied. "Someone sends an SOS, we answer. Simple as that." "The galaxy is starting to understand us better," Amy observed. Morrison smiled slightly. "Understanding is good. But it's not why we do this. We do it because it's right. Because those people needed help. That's reason enough." The Crimson Hawk set course for home. Behind them, another grateful population began rebuilding. Another threat had been stopped. Another call for help had been answered. In the end, that was what being human meant. Being dangerous when necessary. Being kind when possible. And always, always answering when someone needed help. The Deathworlders had found their place in the galaxy not through conquest, but through protection. Not through fear, but through the simple act of showing up when it mattered most. And somewhere in the darkness of space, another distress call would eventually sound. And when it did, humanity would be there. Because that's what Deathworlders do.